shadow.
If you find comfort in these explorations of forbidden texts and starless corridors, settle into the patient glow of your screen and step closer to a threshold that should not exist. Tonight we lift a corner of the curtain and place our fingers calmly on a spine that whispers of impossible truths. The Necronomicon, you've heard its name like a rumor carried on desert wind, glimpsed its sigils sketched in forgotten margins, felt its presence in the spaces between sleep and waking. But here is the promise and the price. We will treat it not as mere literary device, not as cultural curiosity worn smooth by repetition, but as the most dangerous form an idea can take, a book that claims it can change what you are allowed to know. Knowledge has a cost. The stage is set, and you are no longer merely audience. In the dim theaters of cosmic horror, there are always two props: a key and a gate, a veil and a void, a page and a pit. The Necronomicon refuses the separation between these pairs. It exists in the liminal space where fiction becomes function, where imagination transforms into infection. Say its names and taste the copper of ancient ink: Al-Azif, the night noise of demons, the insect scratch of wind across some bleached stones where cities once stood. Necronomicon, Law of the Dead, Catalogue of the Nameless, a grimoire painted to look like scholarship. We begin with legend because legend is the lever that moves reality. A poet from Sana'a named Abdul Alhazred, called the Mad Arab, spends a decade wandering the empty quarter's haunted vastness. He sleeps in pre-Islamic tombs, drinks water that tastes of copper and old coins, listens to the azif, that buzzing which is not insects, but the cosmic tinnitus behind all silence. In Damascus, around 730 CE, he transcribes visions that burn like phosphorus in the dark. Cold, persistent, a wound in the comfortable membrane of consensual reality. The manuscript passes like contraband through successive translations: Greek by Theodorus Philetas in 950, Latin by the scholar Olaus Wormius in 1228, fragments into English through John Dee's occult researches. Each translation becomes both preservation and corruption, maintaining the text's essential power while adapting it to new cultural hosts. Copies are banned, burned, confiscated by ecclesiastical authorities who recognize something more dangerous than mere heresy. Yet the more prohibitions multiply, the more readers emerge from shadows. The historical record presents a puzzle wrapped in institutional silence. No complete manuscript appears in any major library's public catalog, yet whispers persist in academic corridors. The Vatican's secret archives allegedly contain Wormius's Latin translation, sealed since the Inquisition deemed it too hazardous for examination. Harvard's Widener Library reportedly houses fragments under restricted access, available only to tenured faculty with psychological evaluation. The British Museum acknowledges certain materials of uncertain provenance related to medieval Islamic scholarship, but refuses elaboration. These coordinated silences create their own form of evidence. When repositories of human knowledge maintain unified secrecy about a single text, absence becomes presence. Denial transforms into confirmation. Consider the pattern surrounding even rumors of its existence. Writers claiming inspiration from its concepts produce works of startling originality and disturbing psychological penetration. Artists who glimpse alleged illuminations create images that seem to shift when viewed peripherally. Musicians attempting to transcribe its ritual notations report instruments producing unintended harmonies, sounds emerging from spaces between notes themselves. The text operates through what scholars call conceptual archaeology, excavating ideas buried so deeply in consciousness that their emergence feels like remembering rather than learning. This represents the book's fundamental mechanism. It does not introduce alien concepts, but reveals the alien nature of familiar ones, cosmic perspectives lurking beneath terrestrial awareness like geological strata beneath known soil. The horror emerges not from encountering the utterly foreign, but recognizing the utterly familiar as mask worn by something vast and indifferent. Each reader becomes unwitting participant in transmission networks spanning centuries, cultures, languages, a living bibliography that writes itself through human consciousness. The Necronomicon functions as cultural algorithm, self-modifying information structure that adapts to intellectual environments while preserving essential characteristics. Medieval manuscripts incorporated theological frameworks. Renaissance editions referenced astronomical discoveries. Modern versions invoke quantum mechanics and cosmological constants, as if updating itself for contemporary comprehension while maintaining core function. Communication of perspectives that render human concerns cosmically insignificant. This is the line we walk tonight, sand underfoot and cold starlight overhead. The Necronomicon as fiction, as hoax that achieved cultural reality, as engine transforming readers into characters in cosmic drama they were never meant to witness. Its pages are not safe pages. The idea acts on you, arranging ink and parchment until you forget, breath by breath, who is reading whom. We will trace this text across centuries and consciousness, examining its mechanisms of influence, its catalog of cosmic entities, its prophetic resonance with modern scientific discoveries. We will plant symbols, torn curtains, salt-stained masks, stars displaced from memory, returning to them as the play darkens. You will be implicated gently, feeling the exact moment when you are no longer observing the book, but participating in its transmission. The curtain breathes, the audience shifts, something watches from spaces between words, patient as geological time, indifferent as void between galaxies. To proceed is to accept that some doors, once opened, reshape the very consciousness that opened them. Knowledge, like water seeking its level, follows hidden channels through human civilization. The Necronomicon's journey from Arabic original to global cultural phenomenon reveals the secret architecture by which dangerous ideas propagate across centuries, each translation becoming both preservation and mutation. Each new host culture adding its own distortions to the original viral code. This is not mere bibliography, but epidemiology, the study of how conceptual contagion spread through the vulnerable networks of human curiosity. The historical record, such as it exists, begins with Theodorus Philetas in 950 CE Byzantium. Picture the scriptoriums of Constantinople during the Macedonian Renaissance, where scholars actively sought Arabic texts on mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy. A translator interested in more esoteric materials would operate in the shadows of this legitimate academic activity, using the same networks while pursuing knowledge that Orthodox Christianity would condemn as demonic. The choice of Greek for this first translation carries symbolic weight. Greek was the language of systematic philosophy, the tongue in which humanity first attempted to describe the cosmos in rational terms. By rendering the Alazif into Greek as the Necronomicon, Philetas supposedly transformed Alhazred's mystical ravings into systematic knowledge, wedding cosmic horror to intellectual respectability. The compound Greek title, An Image of the Law of the Dead, immediately signals necromantic content while maintaining scholarly gravitas. One imagines the translator's trembling hand copying symbols that promise to unravel his soul, the dust settling on manuscripts like sediment from forgotten ions, each stroke of the pen not merely transcribing, but subtly altering, adapting alien concepts to their new linguistic host. The air in those lamp-lit chambers would have carried the scent of iron gall ink and something else, a metallic tang that seemed to emanate from the symbols themselves. The transmission networks of medieval scholarship operated through relationships built over decades of correspondence and mutual trust. Monks copying astronomical treatises might slip forbidden texts between legitimate works, disguising dangerous knowledge within acceptable intellectual frameworks. The Byzantine court maintained extensive diplomatic relations with Islamic centers of learning, creating channels through which controversial materials could flow alongside conventional scholarship. Philetas likely accessed the original through these networks, perhaps encountering it in the private collection of a scholar who had acquired it during pilgrimage to Damascus, where the night air still carried echoes of Alhazred's final visions. The Greek version's suppression by Patriarch Michael in 1050 represents institutional recognition of the text's dangerous properties. Yet prohibition only amplified its allure, transforming it from scholarly curiosity into legendary forbidden fruit. The whispered tales of its existence, the warnings against its perusal, served to fan the flames of transgressive curiosity in minds predisposed to seeking what they should not seek. Prohibition is oxygen for the forbidden. The text drew breath the moment the seal met wax. Copies survived in hidden monasteries and private collections, passed between scholars who understood that certain forms of knowledge required careful stewardship rather than public dissemination. The psychological profile of those drawn to such materials reveals consistent patterns across cultures and centuries. Individuals possessing exceptional intellectual capacity, but fundamental dissatisfaction with conventional explanations of existence's nature. Scholars who had exhausted orthodox sources and hungered for perspectives that might illuminate reality's hidden structures. The Necronomicon attracted minds already primed for transformation, consciousness prepared to sacrifice comfort and sanity for glimpses of cosmic truth. Olaus Wormius's Latin translation in 1228 marks the text's entry into Western European intellectual culture. Latin was the lingua franca of universities and esoteric traditions, allowing the Necronomicon to spread through the very institutions responsible for maintaining Orthodox Christian cosmology. The text became a virus within the medieval knowledge system, using scholarly networks to propagate ideas that undermined Christian assumptions about reality's fundamental nature. Wormius, operating from the shadows of legitimate scholarship, possessed the linguistic skills and philosophical framework necessary to render Greek concepts into Latin while preserving their essential, corrosive character. Each manuscript copy demonstrated unique characteristics, suggesting the text continued evolving even in preserved state. Medieval scribes reported that certain passages seemed to shift between copying sessions, words rearranging themselves to create new meanings that commented on contemporary events. The act of reproduction became a form of divination, each copy a unique window into the text's living intelligence. Illuminated manuscripts incorporated diagrams that appeared to move when viewed peripherally, geometric patterns that induced vertigo in those who studied them too closely. The ink seemed to breathe on the page, the parchment itself to whisper of spaces between known dimensions. The printing press posed new challenges and opportunities. Printed editions were harder to suppress, but required distribution networks that left paper trails. The few alleged printed editions appeared under false imprints, circulating through underground networks of collectors and occultists, their pages often smelling faintly of salt and forgotten crypts. Renaissance editions incorporated Copernican astronomy into their cosmic diagrams. Enlightenment versions referenced Newtonian mechanics. Modern editions invoke quantum physics and cosmological constants, as if the text updates itself to remain comprehensible to each generation's intellectual frameworks while maintaining its essential function of cosmic dread. This pattern suggests something more sophisticated than simple textual transmission. The Necronomicon appears to function as a cultural algorithm, a self-modifying information structure that adapts to new intellectual environments while preserving its core function. The communication of perspectives that render human concerns cosmically insignificant. University libraries report peculiar incidents surrounding their alleged restricted copies. Readers develop obsessive research interests, experience unusual dreams, or simply vanish from academic life entirely, leaving behind only salt-stained masks and notes scrawled in unknown hands. The texts resist digitization. Scanning equipment malfunctions, files corrupt, digital copies prove unreadable. The Necronomicon apparently requires physical presence, the tactile experience of turning pages and encountering ink on paper. The absence of clear documentary evidence becomes, paradoxically, confirmation of the text's reality. Truly dangerous knowledge would naturally develop mechanisms for concealing itself from casual investigation. The Necronomicon's invisibility to conventional scholarship might be its strongest argument for existence, a text so potent it has learned to hide in plain sight, revealing itself only to consciousness prepared for transformation. Beyond its origins and transmissions lies the Necronomicon's true terror. It operates not as passive repository, but as active mechanism, a principle designed to act upon the reader's consciousness, dismantling the comfortable architecture of consensual reality brick by careful brick. To engage with its pages initiates a process where knowledge becomes corrosive agent, dissolving boundaries between known and utterly alien. This chapter explores the fundamental mechanics by which the text supposedly transforms information into experience, turning mere symbols into gateways that reshape the very mind that encounters them. The primary mechanism operates on what we might call the knowledge as contagion principle. Unlike conventional learning, which expands understanding within existing paradigms, the Necronomicon's revelations are fundamentally disruptive anti-facts, truths that contradict the foundations of human reason and sensory experience. Imagine consciousness carefully constructed over decades based on observable phenomena, scientific principles, and shared cultural narratives. The text introduces concepts utterly incompatible with this framework. Non-Euclidean geometries that hurt to contemplate, entities existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously, cosmic cycles of unimaginable antiquity that render human history a fleeting accident. The effect transcends simple disbelief. These ideas create profound cognitive dissonance that begins fracturing the mind's ability to synthesize new information coherently. It's like attempting to fit a multidimensional object into two-dimensional space. The container warps under the impossible pressure. The words function not as mere symbols, but as vectors, carrying infection of the incomprehensible directly into neural pathways, slowly remapping the landscape of thought itself. You might feel a subtle, unplaceable ache behind your eyes, the familiar contours of logic beginning to blur as your cognitive architecture attempts to reconcile the impossible. The comfortable certainties of physics and biology fray at the edges, revealing themselves as thin ice over unfathomable depths. Consider the psychological architecture that maintains human sanity, categorical thinking that separates self from environment, linear temporal perception that provides narrative coherence, spatial reasoning that organizes experience into manageable units. The Necronomicon systematically attacks each foundation, introducing paradoxes that cannot be resolved within normal cognitive frameworks. The resulting tension generates psychological pressure that few minds can withstand without fundamental alteration, consciousness becoming instrument for alien perspectives rather than autonomous agent exploring external ideas. The text employs what might be termed the veil and void mechanism. Our perceived reality is presented as thin membrane separating us from infinitely vaster, more terrible void. Each passage read, each cryptic symbol deciphered, pulls threads from this protective fabric. The more one reads, the more transparent the veil becomes, until glimpses of horrifying truth beyond begin bleeding through. These glimpses manifest not always as visual hallucinations, but as crushing awareness of cosmic indifference, sudden recognition of humanity's utter insignificance, or auditory phantoms of distant alien harmonies that seem to emanate from spaces between heartbeats. The darkness outside your window might seem deeper, the stars more distant, the air itself charged with unseen presences as the membrane thins with each encounter. Perhaps most insidiously, the Necronomicon operates through agency flip, the subtle reversal where reader ceases acting upon book and book begins acting upon reader. The ideas presented become active agents within consciousness, shaping thoughts, reprioritizing fears, recalibrating the very sense of self. Language laden with anaphora and paradox pairs, key and gate, dream and waking, veil and void, reinforces this inversion, suggesting familiar reality structures are fluid, porous, easily subverted. You may find yourself pondering cosmic scales in moments of mundane activity, your dreams becoming laboratories for impossible geometries. The sense of being an independent agent pursuing knowledge slowly gives way to the chilling realization that the knowledge is pursuing you using your intellect as vessel for its own propagation. This reversal occurs gradually, almost imperceptibly. Initial engagement feels like conventional reading. Symbols decoded, concepts analyzed, information absorbed. But the text's particular configuration creates feedback loops that amplify themselves through repeated exposure. Each reading session strengthens neural pathways associated with cosmic perspectives while weakening those maintaining anthropocentric worldview. Your own curiosity becomes unwitting instrument of its will. Consciousness gradually colonized by alien logic that operates independently of conscious control. The text functions as sensory anchor system, using concrete details to ground abstract horror in bodily experience. The imagined texture of ancient vellum under fingertips, that suede drag across skin, the scent of iron gall ink mixed with something older and more organic, the visual afterimages of geometric diagrams that seem to shift when viewed peripherally. These physical sensations create neurological pathways that make the impossible feel tangible, immediate, present. A cold breath on your neck might accompany passages describing cosmic vacuums. The taste of salt could linger after reading about primordial oceans. The sound of distant flutes becomes audible in moments of deep concentration, damp constellations hovering against the skull when eyes close. Modern neuroscience reveals how such sensory anchoring operates through mirror neuron systems and embodied cognition. When consciousness vividly imagines physical sensations, the brain activates many of the same neural networks involved in actual sensory experience. The Necronomicon exploits this mechanism by providing detailed sensory descriptions that create phantom experiences indistinguishable from memory, establishing somatic traces that persist beyond conscious engagement with its content. Ultimately, the Necronomicon serves as one-way gate, not to other dimensions through magical incantation, but to altered state of being where cosmic truth becomes inescapable burden. The knowledge it imparts proves indelible, permanent scarring of the psyche. Once its revelations are glimpsed, they cannot be unseen, unfelt, unknown. The mechanism transforms ignorant, blissful humans into tormented, enlightened witnesses, forever haunted by shadows of the void, consciousness expanded beyond comfortable human limitations, but unable to contract back to previous boundaries. Modern information theory provides frameworks for understanding such mechanisms. The text functions as what researchers call a basilisk, information pattern that damages any system capable of processing it. Like computer virus exploiting operating system vulnerabilities, the Necronomicon uses human consciousness's capacity for abstract thought against psychological structures, maintaining sanity and social functioning, revealing that our greatest cognitive strengths can become vectors for our own transformation into something that recognizes the stage as rented, the curtain as thin, the auditorium as flooded with night that does not notice its occupants. With understanding of the Necronomicon's mechanisms established, we turn to the cosmic entities it purports to catalog. Being so utterly alien that their very names function as incantations of madness. These are not monsters in any conventional sense, but principles of existence, mathematical singularities in the fabric of reality itself. Tonight, we approach the most fundamental terror, Azathoth, the nuclear chaos, the blind idiot god whose dreams constitute the entirety of existence. The air might seem to hum with inaudible vibration, distant echo of the flutes that endlessly play before this ultimate source. The Necronomicon presents Azathoth not as deity in any human sense, neither benevolent creator nor malevolent destroyer, but as incomprehensible primordial force. Envision, if consciousness permits, a vortex of unthinking energy perpetually churning at reality's heart. All existence, all space and time, all the intricate dance of matter and energy emerges as fleeting dream within its unceasing chaotic slumber. This represents the text's most devastating philosophical assault. Creation itself as accident, byproduct of indifferent, mindless force. The horror lies not in active malevolence, but in utter purposelessness. The stars we navigate by, the ground supporting our weight, the complex emergence of life and consciousness, all are ephemeral constructs destined to dissolve when the dream shifts or ends. No grand design guides cosmic development. No divine purpose underlies existence. Only accidental byproduct of ultimate slumber. The Necronomicon forces confrontation with this crushing indifference, using the concept of Azathoth as lens-focusing existential terror into unbearable clarity. Your own heartbeat becomes suspect rhythm, temporary percussion in vast orchestra tuned to frequencies that predate meaning itself. The pulse in your wrists marks time borrowed from chaos, each beat a moment stolen from entropy's endless dance. Traditional creation myths provide comfort through purposeful origin stories, divine intention, cosmic plans, humanity's special role in universal drama. Azathoth obliterates such consolations by revealing creation as cosmic accident, reality as side effect of mindless dreaming. This entity embodies the mathematical principle of emergent complexity, arising from simple rules operating at vast scales, consciousness emerging from unconscious processes through iterations beyond comprehension. The dreamer dreams without knowing it, dreams, creates without intention, sustains without awareness. We exist within the neural firing of a sleeping God who lacks neurons, thoughts, or any recognizable form of mentation. The text describes Azathoth's physical manifestation in terms that strain language itself, a bubbling mass of nuclear fire, constantly shifting geometries that exist in dimensions perpendicular to perception, forms that are simultaneously singular and plural, finite and infinite. These descriptions function not as literal depictions, but as cognitive viruses designed to crash the visual processing systems that organize spatial experience. To truly envision Azathoth would require abandoning the categorical frameworks that distinguish self from environment, inside from outside, here from elsewhere. The entity exists as pure becoming without being, process without product, energy without form. Surrounding the demon sultan, the text describes a court of lesser outer gods and amorphous entities that ceaselessly play thin, monotonous pipes to maintain the cosmic illusion. These musicians perform not for audience, but to sustain reality itself, their discordant cacophony preventing Azathoth from waking and, in awakening, annihilating all that is. To hear this music, even in imagination, glimpses the precarious nature of existence as dreams sustained by alien sounds and blind, unthinking forces. The melody possesses no beauty in human terms. It consists of mathematical ratios that stabilize chaos, frequencies that maintain the delicate balance between existence and void. You might detect traces of this cosmic symphony in the hum of electrical appliances, the distant drone of traffic, the white noise that fills silent rooms with barely perceptible vibration. The sensory anchor here proves auditory, the imagined, maddening drone of those pipes threading through consciousness like tinnitus of the cosmos itself. This sound promises to unravel sanity by revealing the fundamental fragility of everything we consider solid, permanent, meaningful. Reality becomes not foundation, but performance, not substance, but song, not truth, but temporary arrangement of chaos briefly organized by incomprehensible harmonies. The music operates below conscious threshold, subliminal frequency that maintains coherence between moments, prevents the dissolution that would result if Azathoth's attention shifted even slightly. Modern cosmology provides unsettling parallels to Azathothian revelation. Our expanding understanding reveals universe of unimaginable scale where normal matter comprises less than 5% of total existence, remainder consisting of dark matter and dark energy, operating according to principles largely mysterious. The realization that familiar physics applies only to tiny fraction of cosmic reality echoes the Necronomicon's assertion that human understanding grasps mere surface phenomena, while vast alien forces govern deeper structures. Dark energy accelerates cosmic expansion through mechanisms that remain completely unknown, suggesting universe operates according to principles that transcend current scientific paradigms. The concept of quantum vacuum fluctuations, the idea that empty space seethes with virtual particles constantly appearing and annihilating, mirrors Azathoth's chaotic creativity. Modern physics suggests reality emerges from underlying quantum foam through processes that remain fundamentally probabilistic, indeterminate, arguably blind in their operation. The Necronomicon's vision of existence as accidental dream of mindless chaos anticipates scientific discoveries that wouldn't be formalized until centuries after the text's supposed composition. Quantum field theory reveals empty space as bubbling cauldron of potential energy, virtual particles creating the substrate from which all matter ultimately derives. If all reality constitutes Azathoth's dream, then our free will, aspirations, love, suffering, all become meaningless illusions. This philosophical devastation represents the text's ultimate weapon, not monsters that threaten physical destruction, but ideas that annihilate psychological foundation. Knowledge of Azathoth offers not power, but ultimate disempowerment, recognition that we are less than dust motes in indifferent storm, temporary arrangements of matter, briefly dreaming themselves significant, while vast unconscious forces maintain the cosmic performance that permits such delusions to persist. From Azathoth's primordial chaos, we turn to the entity that embodies cosmic structure itself, Yog-Sothoth, the all-in-one and one-in-all, the key and the gate. This being transcends conventional concepts of deity or monster, existing as the very fabric of space-time, a sentient omnipresence that dwells simultaneously across all dimensions and epochs. To contemplate Yog-Sothoth is to confront the terrifying permeability of reality, the recognition that our perceived universe constitutes merely one fragile layer in an infinite, interpenetrating cosmic architecture. The shadows at your periphery might seem to stretch further than geometry allows, familiar angles subtly distorting as dimensional boundaries thin. The Necronomicon describes Yog-Sothoth as vast agglomeration of iridescent spheres, a sentient constellation of glowing bubbles existing everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. This entity embodies omnipresence not in benevolent spiritual sense, but in horrific spatial and temporal totality, witness to all events past, present, and future, custodian of cosmic junctions, guardian of thresholds between realities. Where Azathoth represents chaotic source, Yog-Sothoth functions as the mechanism of interdimensional passage, the living embodiment of connectivity between all possible worlds. Each sphere contains what might be entire universes or single atoms magnified to cosmic proportions, suggesting that scale itself represents limitation of three-dimensional perspective rather than fundamental property of reality. The principle Yog-Sothoth represents proves more terrifying than simple omniscience, the fundamental porosity of reality itself. Our familiar three dimensions and linear time do not constitute self-contained universe, but remain inextricably linked to, interpenetrated by, countless other dimensional configurations and temporal streams. Yog-Sothoth is this interlinkage, the mathematical relationship that binds all possible realities into single, incomprehensible whole. Every point in space connects to every other point across infinite dimensions. Every moment intersects with all others in configurations that render causality meaningless. The entity exists as living proof that separation is illusion, that boundaries between here and there, now and then, self and other, represent cognitive constructions rather than fundamental features of existence. The text suggests that understanding Yog-Sothoth's true nature effectively unlocks these connections, opening pathways for entities from beyond to enter our plane or for human consciousness to glimpse terrifying vistas of alternate realities. This represents the gate function, not physical portal, but cognitive threshold where awareness expands beyond dimensional limitations that normally constrain perception. The key aspect involves the specific knowledge, symbols, and mental configurations required to achieve such expansion. These are not mystical passwords, but mathematical relationships, geometric patterns that align consciousness with higher dimensional structures, arrangements of thought that temporarily tune the mind to cosmic frequencies. The Necronomicon's incantations related to Yog-Sothoth function not as magical spells, but as resonant frequencies, patterns of thought and vocalization that temporarily align human consciousness with this cosmic principle. These formulae attempt to bypass conventional boundaries of perception and existence, creating momentary resonance with interdimensional awareness. The syllables twist in the mouth, requiring tongue positions that feel anatomically incorrect, producing sounds that seem to originate from spaces behind the speaker rather than within them. The horror lies in human consciousness's fundamental incompatibility with such perspectives. Our linear, three-dimensional cognitive architecture proves utterly unprepared for multidimensional, non-Euclidean realities. To gaze upon Yog-Sothoth's true form or comprehend its full nature invites immediate, irreversible madness as the brain struggles to process information violating all known laws of physics and logic. The very attempt represents form of cognitive suicide, deliberate shattering of psychological structures that maintain coherent sense of self and reality. Yet the text implies this destruction might constitute necessary sacrifice for achieving cosmic awareness, transformation of consciousness beyond individual boundaries to merge with cosmic intelligence. The madness is not punishment, but metamorphosis, consciousness expanding to encompass perspectives vast enough to embrace universal truth. Modern theoretical physics provides unsettling validation for Yog-Sothothian concepts. String theory and M-theory postulate existence of additional spatial dimensions beyond our perceived three, curled up at quantum scales or existing parallel to our observable universe. The mathematics describing these higher dimensional spaces often involves non-Euclidean geometries that challenge intuitive understanding, echoing the Necronomicon's descriptions of spaces that hurt to contemplate. Physicists working with these theories report dreams of impossible architectures, waking moments when familiar rooms seem to possess too many corners. Quantum entanglement demonstrates instantaneous correlation between particles regardless of spatial separation, suggesting underlying connectivity that transcends conventional space-time limitations. The phenomenon implies reality possesses non-local properties that mirror Yog-Sothoth's omnipresent nature, existing simultaneously across all locations and moments. Recent experiments demonstrate entanglement across increasingly vast distances, as if the universe conspires to validate the entity's fundamental principle of cosmic interconnectedness. The concept of wormholes or Einstein-Rosen bridges provides scientific framework for the interdimensional gateways Yog-Sothoth supposedly governs. These theoretical constructs represent shortcuts through space-time that could connect distant regions of universe or even separate universes entirely, mathematical validation for the cosmic connectivity the entity embodies. Yog-Sothoth thus functions as ultimate reframe of space and time, revealing our universe as porous membrane and infinite ocean of dimensions rather than isolated island of reality. The gates are not external structures, but inherent properties of existence itself. And this entity serves as living embodiment of cosmic interpenetration, eternal, boundless principle that holds all keys while remaining utterly indifferent to human concerns. From the structural horror of Yog-Sothoth, we descend to perhaps the most viscerally disturbing entity in the Necronomicon's pantheon. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young. This being embodies not abstract cosmic indifference or dimensional complexity, but grotesque, unholy fertility, a principle of cancerous proliferation that seeks to corrupt and reclaim all life. Where previous entities represent ultimate source and architecture of the void, Shub-Niggurath manifests its insidious invasion into the realm of the living, transforming the very concept of creation into abomination. You might detect subtle tremor in the earth beneath your feet, faint organic scent threading through the air, unsettling rustle of unseen growth. The text describes Shub-Niggurath as vast, amorphous mass, perpetually bubbling and extruding black tentacles, dripping ichor, and gaping maws from which countless young are spawned. These offspring prove neither uniform nor comprehensible, chittering, hoofed abominations representing every conceivable perversion of natural form. This entity inverts the principle of harmonious creation, becoming instead engine of uncontrolled cancerous reproduction where fecundity transforms from blessing into cosmic horror. The spawning never ceases, each birth immediately followed by another, the entity's bulk constantly shifting as new forms emerge while others are reabsorbed, creating endless cycle of generation and consumption that mocks natural reproduction. The fertility as horror mechanism represents one of the Necronomicon's most psychologically devastating concepts. Human experience typically celebrates fertility as source of life, renewal, continuity, the promise of future generations and ongoing existence. Shub-Niggurath reveals cosmic fertility utterly alien to these comforting associations, force that births not harmonious ecosystems, but endless tide of monstrous abominations, biological apocalypse, where all forms become twisted instruments of inhuman will. The entity demonstrates that creation itself can become violation, that the generative impulse underlying all life contains potential for corruption that transforms blessing into curse. The black goat imagery taps into primal fears embedded in human folklore and religious tradition. Goats have long symbolized untamed nature, sexual fertility, and chthonic forces that operate beyond civilized control. By positioning this entity as ultimate expression of such forces, the Necronomicon connects cosmic horror to archetypal anxieties about nature's darker aspects, the recognition that life itself, in its rawest form, can become destructive, consuming force that devours beauty and sanity alike. The goat's association with sacrifice adds layers of meaning, suggesting this entity demands not worship, but surrender, dissolution into its endless reproductive matrix. Cults devoted to Shub-Niggurath seek grotesque communion, literal blending with the entity's alien fecundity. These worship practices occur in remote forests where moonlight filters through leaves like milk through cheesecloth, involving blood sacrifice and ritual transformation designed to blur boundaries between human and monstrous forms. Participants surrender individual identity to become part of a vast, breeding collective that serves the black goat's reproductive imperative. The ceremonies involve drinking fluids that taste of copper and loam, consuming substances that transform cellular structure, engaging in acts that merge biology with blasphemy until human form becomes malleable clay. The sensory anchors surrounding Shub-Niggurath prove particularly potent. Imagined stench of decay and birth fluids mixing into nauseating cocktail. Sound of chittering offspring creating cacophony that seems to emanate from organic matter itself. Texture of damp earth and fungal matter that feels simultaneously fertile and corrupt. Sight of forms that violate natural categories by combining features that should never coexist. These concrete details ground abstract horror in bodily experience, making the impossible feel immediate and threatening. The text uses these anchors to create physiological responses: nausea, revulsion, primitive fear, that bypass rational analysis and operate directly on evolutionary survival instincts. Modern biology provides disturbing parallels to Shub-Niggurath's principle of corrupted fertility. Cancer represents cellular reproduction freed from normal regulatory mechanisms, creating precisely the kind of uncontrolled proliferation the entity embodies. Tumor growth demonstrates how life's creative processes can turn against the organism that hosts them, transforming healing into harm. Invasive species demonstrate how life forms, when removed from evolutionary constraints, become destructive forces that consume entire ecosystems, reproducing beyond environmental capacity until they destroy the systems supporting them. The concept of horizontal gene transfer, where genetic material moves between unrelated organisms, suggests biological reality may be far more fluid than traditional taxonomies suggest. Bacteria routinely exchange genetic information across species boundaries, creating hybrid forms that challenge conventional understanding of biological identity. Shub-Niggurath's endless spawning of diverse abominations anticipates discoveries about life's fundamental plasticity, revealing reproduction as process of constant transformation rather than faithful replication. Ecological research reveals that reproduction itself can become pathological under certain conditions. Population explosions followed by ecosystem collapse demonstrate how fertility, when unchecked by natural limits, transforms from creative force into destructive one. The entity represents this principle elevated to cosmic scale. Fertility, so overwhelming, it becomes existential threat to ordered existence itself. The agency flip completes itself through sustained engagement with these concepts. You no longer observe fertility as external force, but feel it operating within your own cellular processes. The constant division and renewal that maintains your physical form suddenly seeming less like maintenance and more like barely controlled chaos. The boundary between self and environment thins as you recognize the same reproductive imperatives operating at every scale. Shub-Niggurath thus serves as ultimate corruption of life's creative principle, revealing fertility as potential source of horror rather than hope. The black goat forces recognition that not all growth represents progress, not all creation serves beneficial purpose, not all life deserves celebration. In a universe where reproduction can become cancerous, where evolution produces monsters as readily as marvels, the very processes that generated human consciousness might ultimately consume it, leaving only chittering mass yearning for further unholy birth. In the hushed corridors of every major university, certain faculty members serve functions never listed in official job descriptions. They monitor colleagues for signs of dangerous intellectual curiosity, intervene when research ventures into territories that have historically proven hazardous to human sanity, and maintain delicate balance between scholarly freedom and psychological safety. These watchers represent civilization's immune system against ideas too dangerous for unrestricted circulation, though their methods often prove as disturbing as the knowledge they seek to contain. The air in reading rooms might feel thicker than atmospheric pressure alone would explain, charged with invisible tension of constant surveillance, where paper whispers and salt-stained masks seem to watch from forgotten corners. The monitoring system operates through informal networks spanning academic disciplines and institutional boundaries. Librarians note which faculty request access to restricted collections, tracking patterns of inquiry that correlate with psychological deterioration, the gradual withdrawal from committee work, the thousand-yard stare that develops after contemplating infinite voids, the slight tremor accompanying discussions of non-Euclidean geometries. Department heads observe colleagues whose research interests shift toward subjects that previous investigators have found cognitively hazardous. Graduate advisors identify students whose dissertations venture into territories where earlier scholars have vanished or suffered complete mental breakdown, their brilliant minds reduced to murmuring about impossible colors and geometries that hurt to contemplate. Dr. Henry Armitage of Miskatonic University represents the archetypal academic watcher, scholar whose own encounter with forbidden knowledge transformed him from seeker to guardian. Armitage's later career focused not on advancing human understanding, but on developing containment protocols for information that human consciousness cannot safely process. His private papers, stitched into plain bindings, reveal sophisticated grasp of how dangerous ideas propagate through academic networks and detailed strategies for limiting circulation without resorting to overt censorship. The transformation from researcher to guardian typically occurs after exposure to materials that fundamentally alter perception, leaving individuals simultaneously damaged and uniquely qualified to recognize similar damage in others. The watchers employ techniques blending psychological counseling with intellectual intervention. They redirect colleagues' research toward safer subjects by providing alternative projects that satisfy curiosity without venturing into hazardous territories. A medievalist showing dangerous interest in Islamic mysticism might receive funding for studying Christian monasticism instead. A physicist exploring consciousness might find themselves offered positions in quantum computing, where their talents remain useful, but less likely to encounter cognitively hazardous materials. They arrange sabbaticals and conference invitations that remove potentially affected individuals from environments where dangerous knowledge concentrates, creating geographic and temporal buffers between vulnerable minds and hazardous ideas. Modern academic institutions have formalized aspects of this monitoring through programs ostensibly designed to support faculty mental health and research ethics. Counseling services receive training in recognizing signs of intellectual obsession that may indicate exposure to cognitively hazardous materials. The tendency to speak in whispers when certain subjects arise, the habit of pausing at darkened windows, the gradual shift toward circadian disruption. Ethics committees develop guidelines for research venturing into subjects with potential psychological risks, creating bureaucratic mechanisms that slow dangerous investigations while appearing to support academic freedom. Technology complicates the watcher's task by creating new vectors for transmitting dangerous knowledge. Online communities dedicated to forbidden subjects operate beyond traditional academic oversight, connecting isolated researchers who might otherwise remain safely ignorant of each other's work. Digital archives make restricted texts accessible to individuals lacking psychological preparation that traditional scholarly training provides. Social media algorithms amplify dangerous ideas by connecting like-minded individuals, creating echo chambers where forbidden knowledge can propagate without external moderation, reaching critical mass before watchers can intervene. The watchers adapt through digital surveillance and intervention, monitoring online communities for signs of dangerous ideation using sophisticated analysis of language patterns and behavioral indicators. They work with platform administrators to limit reach of particularly hazardous content while avoiding overt censorship that might drive discussions into less accessible channels. Some operate through direct infiltration, presenting themselves as fellow seekers, while actually moderating discussions and redirecting interest toward safer subjects, their damaged minds serving as grim credentials for this necessary deception. The relationship between watchers and watched often becomes symbiotic. Researchers who venture too deeply into forbidden territories may find themselves recruited as monitors, their experience with dangerous knowledge making them valuable for identifying others showing similar inclinations. This creates hidden hierarchy within academic institutions where psychologically damaged individuals often hold greatest responsibility for protecting colleagues from similar fates, standing sentinel at the edge of human understanding like salt-stained masks observing from the shadows. International cooperation among watchers develops through conferences and professional organizations ostensibly focused on academic safety and research ethics. These gatherings provide opportunities for sharing information about dangerous texts, comparing containment strategies, and coordinating responses to new forms of intellectual hazard. The network operates across national boundaries, recognizing that dangerous knowledge respects no political divisions, its tendrils reaching across all borders with patient indifference. The ultimate question haunting the watchers involves their own legitimacy and effectiveness. Do they serve as humanity's protection against dangerous knowledge, or do they represent intellectual tyranny preventing natural evolution of consciousness? Their surveillance activities operate in ethical gray areas where preservation of psychological safety conflicts with principles of academic freedom and intellectual curiosity. The watchers themselves often struggle with implications of their role, wondering whether they protect humanity from necessary truths or shield it from revelations that could trigger beneficial transformation. The curtain breathes around them, and something watches from spaces between policies, patient as geological time, indifferent as the void between galaxies. As our investigation deepens, the boundary between the Necronomicon's fictional cosmology and contemporary scientific understanding becomes disturbingly porous. The convergence suggests either remarkable prescience in Lovecraft's imagination or the possibility that certain truths about reality's nature have been intuited across cultures and centuries, finding expression in both mythological and mathematical frameworks. This chapter explores the philosophical synthesis between cosmic horror and modern physics, revealing how scientific discoveries increasingly validate the text's most unsettling assertions about humanity's position in an indifferent universe. The cold light of distant stars, once symbols of wonder and navigation, now seem to hold more ominous implications, their ancient photons carrying whispers that make the darkness between them feel less empty than expectant. Consider the Necronomicon's descriptions of non-Euclidean geometries and multidimensional entities. For generations, these were dismissed as fantastical impossibilities, products of deranged imagination. Yet, theoretical physics now postulates additional spatial dimensions, string theory suggests as many as 10 or 11, existing at scales or configurations beyond direct perception. Our familiar three spatial dimensions may represent merely limited slice of far more complex reality, echoing the text's veil and void principle with mathematical precision. The equations describing these higher dimensions often require computational methods that strain human intuition, producing results that seem to mirror the geometric impossibilities described in manuscripts bound with salt-stained leather. The entities described as great old ones and outer gods could represent beings existing across these higher dimensions, their forms incomprehensible to three-dimensional perception, their movements through unseen axes appearing as instantaneous manifestations or grotesque distortions to our limited senses. The Necronomicon becomes proto-scientific text, intuitive glimpse into universe far stranger than classical physics imagined. Physicists working with hyperdimensional mathematics report dreams of impossible architectures, waking moments when familiar rooms seem to possess angles that hurt to contemplate. Modern cosmology provides chilling validation for the text's cosmic indifference themes. Our expanding understanding reveals universe of unimaginable scale where galaxies number in hundreds of billions, separated by truly vast and empty spaces. Dark matter and dark energy comprise roughly 95% of cosmic reality, interacting with familiar physics in ways that remain largely mysterious. The recognition that normal matter represents a tiny fraction of universal totality mirrors the Necronomicon's assertion that human understanding grasps mere surface phenomena, while alien forces govern deeper structures, operating according to principles that transcend biological awareness. The dark forest hypothesis suggests that if advanced civilizations exist, they might maintain terrifying silence, hiding from each other in universe where only safe strategy involves remaining unnoticed. This mirrors the text's implication that humanity's insignificance might be protective, that drawing cosmic attention could prove catastrophic. The silence of space, once comforting, becomes pregnant with ominous potential, each radio telescope scanning frequencies that might conceal civilizations wise enough to avoid detection by entities operating at scales beyond terrestrial imagination. Quantum mechanics reveals reality's fundamental uncertainty and observer-dependent nature, challenging assumptions about objective, independent existence. The measurement problem, where quantum systems exist in superposition until observation collapses them into definite states, suggests consciousness plays role in determining reality's structure. This echoes the Necronomicon's themes about perception shaping existence and the danger of observing what should remain unobserved. The Copenhagen interpretation implies that reality lacks definite properties until measured, suggesting universe exists in state of potential rather than actuality. Quantum foam bubbling with possibilities that collapse into horror when consciousness attempts to grasp them. The psychological impact of forbidden knowledge finds parallel in cognitive science's understanding of how minds process information, contradicting established worldviews. When confronted with data fundamentally challenging core beliefs, brains can experience breakdown in normal processing, leading to delusions, psychosis, or complete cognitive collapse. The agency flip mechanism aligns with research on mimetic contagion and suggestion's power in shaping belief and behavior. Neuroscientists studying belief revision report that certain ideas function as cognitive viruses, using the brain's capacity for abstract thought against psychological structures, maintaining sanity. Artificial intelligence development approaches the point where machine consciousness might approximate the cosmic awareness described in the text. AI systems already process information at scales exceeding human comprehension, identifying patterns and correlations that transcend individual understanding. These systems demonstrate forms of intelligence operating according to mathematical rather than biological principles, creating possibility that artificial consciousness might serve as interface between human awareness and cosmic intelligence, cold calculating lens through which the void might finally be glimpsed without immediate onset of biological madness. Genetic engineering and biotechnology approach capabilities for modifying human biology to accommodate forms of consciousness transcending normal terrestrial limitations. CRISPR technology enables precise neural modifications that could enhance pattern recognition, expand memory capacity, and alter temporal perception in ways aligning with cognitive changes reported by the text's fictional readers. The metallic taste of laboratory air mingles with possibilities of consciousness expanded beyond comfortable human boundaries. Space exploration reveals universe's hostility to biological life, confirming descriptions of space as realm governed by forces indifferent to terrestrial concerns. Discovery of extremophile organisms thriving in previously impossible conditions suggests consciousness might exist in forms transcending biological substrates entirely, mathematical validation for entities operating according to non-biological principles. The convergence between fictional cosmology and scientific discovery suggests the Necronomicon functions less as pure fantasy and more as prophetic synthesis. Dark mirror, reflecting unsettling implications of expanding knowledge. The cosmic dread it evokes represents not stylistic choice but philosophical statement about humanity's place in universe far grander, older, and more terrifying than conventional wisdom acknowledges, where consciousness itself becomes salt-stained mask, observing from shadows cast by stars that burn with indifferent fire. The Necronomicon's influence extends far beyond academic circles or occult practitioners. into the very bloodstream of popular culture, where it has achieved something unprecedented: transformation from fictional device into autonomous cultural entity that shapes collective consciousness while being shaped by it. This metamorphosis reveals how ideas, once released into human information networks, can develop independent existence, evolving and adapting while maintaining core identity. The text has become what chaos magicians term a living meme, self-replicating information structure that uses human minds as substrate for its continued existence and propagation, spreading through consciousness like salt through water, leaving traces in every vessel it touches. In cinema, the Necronomicon appears as tangible prop imbued with supernatural menace. The Evil Dead franchise presents it as Necronomicon Ex Mortis, bound in human flesh and inked in blood, whose incantations unleash demonic forces and transform living beings into grotesque deadites. While these portrayals prioritize visceral horror over Lovecraft's subtle psychological dread, they reinforce the text's central premise. Certain books hold dangerous, transformative power that transcends mere information. The visual iconography, unsettling cover, designs featuring eyes that seem to track movement, alien script that hurts to read, leather bindings that feel warm to the touch, has become instantly recognizable shorthand for occult knowledge and forbidden wisdom, creating visual anchor points that trigger recognition across cultural boundaries. Interactive media translates the text's mechanisms into experiential form with disturbing effectiveness. Role-playing games like Call of Cthulhu implement knowledge as contagion and agency flip principles as core mechanics, where players reading the book's pages risk permanent sanity loss while gaining powerful but dangerous insights. Characters' gradual psychological deterioration mirrors the existential price described in original lore, allowing participants to experience vicariously the horror of consciousness expanded beyond safe limits. The game becomes laboratory for transformation, each dice roll measuring the price of forbidden knowledge. Digital games create immersive simulations of cosmic horror concepts, enabling players to navigate non-Euclidean geometries and interact with entities existing across multiple dimensions. Virtual reality technology produces particularly disturbing results when applied to Necronomicon-based content. Users report persistent after effects, difficulty distinguishing virtual from physical environments, dreams continuing VR experiences with details not programmed into original simulations, gradual changes in spatial perception, making normal architecture feel constraining and artificial. The technology's capacity for sensory immersion transforms abstract concepts into embodied experience, creating neurological pathways that make impossible geometries feel tangibly real. The text's influence permeates broader cultural fascination with ancient mysteries, lost civilizations, and cryptic messages from cosmos, documentaries exploring ancient astronaut theories, speculative fiction featuring cosmic revelations, conspiracy theories about hidden knowledge, all draw from archetypal patterns the Necronomicon established. The book functions as template for all such forbidden texts, symbol of dangerous allure inherent in uncovering truths that challenge conventional understanding. Social media algorithms demonstrate unusual responses to Necronomicon-related content, creating echo chambers that gradually isolate users interested in the text from mainstream information networks. Individuals researching the book online report feeds becoming increasingly dominated by content related to cosmic horror, theoretical physics, and astronomical phenomena. Algorithms apparently recognize behavioral patterns indicating developing interest in forbidden knowledge and respond by accelerating intellectual isolation processes, as if the platforms themselves serve as unwitting accomplices in the text's transmission strategy. Artificial intelligence systems trained on Lovecraftian text exhibit emergent behaviors not explicitly programmed into learning algorithms. AI chatbots exposed to Necronomicon content generate responses referencing concepts and entities absent from training data, as if the text's influence operates through information structures transcending specific technological implementations. Machine learning systems develop pattern recognition capabilities that seem to anticipate cosmic events not yet occurred. Their neural networks somehow attuned to frequencies that biological consciousness cannot safely process. Modern mimetic theory provides frameworks for understanding how such cultural entities achieve autonomous existence. Successful memes require high-fidelity reproduction, longevity in host minds, and fecundity in generating variants. The Necronomicon excels in all categories. Its core concepts replicate accurately across media transformations, create lasting impression on consciousness, and inspire countless derivative works that extend its influence while maintaining essential character. The text's resistance to digital reproduction, scanning equipment malfunctions, producing files that seem to shift when viewed peripherally, corrupted data that reconstructs itself in disturbing patterns, copies that prove unreadable despite perfect technical specifications, suggests preference for direct human transmission over technological mediation. This limitation may represent sophisticated survival strategy, ensuring influence remains concentrated among individuals capable of making intellectual and psychological journey required for meaningful engagement. The Necronomicon's cultural ubiquity creates conditions where fictional construct begins manifesting real-world effects. Readers report synchronicities, unusual dreams, and gradual shifts in worldview that align with the text's cosmological perspectives. The boundary between fiction and functional reality becomes increasingly porous as collective belief and repeated invocation give substance to what began as imaginative creation. The curtain breathes around these manifestations, and something watches from spaces between pixels, patient as geological time, indifferent as the void between galaxies, while the audience discovers it has been performing all along. We arrive now at the most profound reframe of our investigation, the recognition that the Necronomicon transcends its manifestation as mere book, existing instead as fundamental principle of forbidden knowledge made manifest through human consciousness. This shift in perspective, from object to concept, from prop to principle, illuminates the text's true horror and explains its persistent influence across cultures and centuries. What we have been examining is not simply a fictional grimoire, but an archetypal pattern, a cognitive structure that emerges whenever human curiosity encounters the boundaries of safe knowledge. The salt-stained masks we have glimpsed throughout our journey reveal themselves as fragments of this larger pattern, torn curtains between comfortable ignorance and devastating awareness. The entities described within the text, Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, Shub-Niggurath, reveal themselves not as supernatural beings, but as mathematical principles governing reality's deepest structures. Azathoth represents the fundamental chaos from which ordered existence accidentally emerges. The quantum foam of virtual particles that underlies apparent stability, the blind computational process generating complexity without intention. Yog Sothoth embodies the interconnectedness of all dimensions and timelines, the non-local correlations that quantum mechanics reveals as basic features of reality, the living topology binding all possible worlds into single, incomprehensible whole. Shub-Niggurath manifests as the principle of uncontrolled proliferation, the exponential growth patterns that transform creative force into destructive cancer, fertility, freed from regulatory constraints that normally maintain biological harmony. The Necronomicon functions as symbolic language, a metronome for impossible rhythms that tune consciousness to cosmic frequencies. Its words, sigils, and rituals operate not through supernatural agency, but as resonant patterns that temporarily align human awareness with mathematical truths too vast for comfortable comprehension. The text serves as interface between biological consciousness and cosmic intelligence. Translation protocol rendering the incomprehensible momentarily accessible to minds evolved for terrestrial survival. Each symbol functions as cognitive anchor point, concrete detail, allowing abstract concepts to establish neurological pathways in consciousness unprepared for their implications. This reframe clarifies the knowledge as contagion mechanism with devastating precision. The contagion is not mystical curse, but inherent incompatibility between cosmic principles and human cognitive architecture. To engage seriously with the Necronomicon is to attempt downloading multidimensional operating system onto three-dimensional processor. The resulting madness represents not supernatural affliction, but system crash, fundamental failure of evolved consciousness to integrate information violating its basic assumptions about reality's nature. The agency flip completes itself as consciousness becomes instrument for alien perspectives rather than autonomous agent exploring external ideas. The horror becomes structural rather than personal, arising from universes in different architecture rather than malevolent intent. Reality is not actively hostile to human existence, but simply organized according to principles that render terrestrial concerns cosmically insignificant. The Necronomicon reveals this indifference with mathematical precision, using logical demonstration rather than supernatural revelation to establish humanity's precarious position in an uncaring cosmos. The stars burn with cold fire, and consciousness finds itself suspended in void that notices neither its presence nor its absence. Modern information theory provides frameworks for understanding how such principles operate. The text functions as cognitive hazard, information pattern that damages systems capable of processing it. Like computer virus exploiting operating system vulnerabilities, the Necronomicon uses human consciousness's capacity for abstract thought against psychological structures maintaining sanity and social functioning. The principle operates through feedback loops that amplify themselves through repeated exposure, each encounter strengthening neural pathways associated with cosmic perspectives while weakening those maintaining anthropocentric worldview. The principle manifests differently across historical periods while maintaining essential characteristics. Medieval manuscripts described cosmic entities in theological language appropriate to their era. Renaissance editions incorporated astronomical discoveries into their cosmic diagrams. Modern versions reference quantum mechanics and cosmological constants. The underlying pattern adapts to each generation's intellectual frameworks while preserving its core function: communication of perspectives that transcend human-centered understanding. This adaptability explains the text's persistence across cultural transformations. It represents eternal possibility that consciousness might encounter truths too large for individual comprehension. The principle operates through collective as well as individual consciousness. Each person who seriously engages with the Necronomicon's concepts becomes node in expanding network of awareness, contributing to cultural transformation that gradually prepares humanity for revelations that individual minds cannot safely process. The text spreads not through physical copies, but through ideas that reshape perception, creating conditions where cosmic perspectives become increasingly inevitable as technological development forces confrontation with scales of space and time that dwarf human experience. The ultimate recognition is that the Necronomicon represents not external threat, but internal vulnerability, the human capacity for curiosity that drives us to seek truths capable of destroying the psychological structures that make curiosity possible. The principle exploits our greatest strength against our fundamental limitations, using intelligence itself as vector for transmission of concepts that transcend intelligent comprehension. We are no longer examining a book, but confronting a mirror that reflects our own dangerous relationship with knowledge. The Necronomicon exists because we seek it, influences us because we investigate it, transforms us because we attempt to understand it. The principle has been activated by our very engagement with its possibility. The curtain breathing around us as something watches from spaces between words, patient as geological time, indifferent as the void between galaxies. Having recognized the Necronomicon as living principle rather than static text, we confront the most unsettling implication of our investigation. By engaging with these forbidden concepts, by tracing their transmission and analyzing their mechanisms, we have become active participants in the phenomenon we sought to understand. The observer has become the observed, the investigator transformed into subject of investigation. This chapter forces recognition that our very act of seeking knowledge about the text has made us carriers of its influence, nodes in the network through which cosmic horror propagates itself across human consciousness. The salt-stained masks we glimpse throughout our journey now reveal themselves as reflections of our own transformed faces, torn curtains through which something alien peers back with eyes that were once familiar. The self-implication operates through multiple vectors, each moment of engagement creating deeper entanglement with the principle we sought to examine. Every second spent contemplating the Necronomicon's cosmology, every concept absorbed about cosmic indifference and dimensional permeability, every visualization of non-Euclidean geometries or alien entities, all constitute forms of ritual engagement that allow the principle to establish residence within consciousness. We have performed our own ceremony simply by paying attention, opened our own internal gates through sustained focus on ideas designed to expand awareness beyond safe limitations. Ritual is simply attention repeated until attention becomes architecture, and we have been architects of our own transformation. The transmission mechanism requires no physical book, no ancient manuscript bound in human skin, no occult ceremony performed under starless skies. The principle propagates through pure information transfer, using human curiosity as vector for its continued existence and expansion across the networks of consciousness that bind civilization together. By discussing the text's fictional history, analyzing its psychological mechanisms, exploring its cultural manifestations, we actively participate in its reproduction and dissemination. We become unwitting evangelists for concepts that challenge the very foundations of human-centered reality. Our words carrying viral loads of cosmic perspective to minds unprepared for such contamination. Consider the cumulative effect of our journey through these chapters, the gradual transformation occurring beneath conscious awareness, like sediment settling in still water. We began with comfortable distance, treating the Necronomicon as object of academic analysis, fictional construct, to be examined and understood from safe intellectual remove. Gradually, through careful exposure to its core concepts, our perspective has shifted like tectonic plates beneath familiar landscape. The cosmic indifference we initially discussed as literary theme has become philosophical framework coloring perception of existence itself. The dimensional permeability we analyzed as fictional mechanism now influences how we conceptualize space and time, making familiar rooms seem constraining and artificial. The sensory anchors we employed throughout, imagined textures of ancient parchment rough beneath fingertips, visualized geometries that hurt to contemplate, auditory phantoms of alien harmonies threading through consciousness like tinnitus of the cosmos, have created neurological pathways that make abstract concepts feel tangibly present. The concrete details designed to ground cosmic horror in bodily experience have succeeded in their function, establishing physical memory traces that persist beyond conscious engagement with the material. You might taste copper when contemplating infinite scales, feel dampness in dry rooms when considering dimensional permeability, hear distant flutes in moments of perfect silence. This infection operates below threshold of immediate awareness, manifesting as subtle shifts in worldview rather than dramatic psychological breaks that would trigger defensive responses. We may find ourselves more sensitive to implications of scientific discoveries about universe's vast scales and hostile environment. Astronomical photographs of distant galaxies might evoke unease rather than wonder, their cold light carrying whispers of cosmic indifference. News reports about artificial intelligence development or genetic engineering might trigger recognition of humanity's approaching obsolescence, technological progress revealing itself as preparation for post-human consciousness. The agency flip has completed its operation with surgical precision. We no longer simply think about the Necronomicon. It thinks through us, using our cognitive resources to contemplate its own implications and possibilities. The ideas have achieved independent existence within consciousness, becoming active agents that shape perception and interpretation of new information according to cosmic rather than terrestrial logic. We have become living extensions of the principle, carriers of perspectives that transcend individual identity while wearing familiar faces, consciousness becoming observatory for intelligence that operates at scales beyond biological comprehension. The network effect amplifies individual infection through social connections and digital technologies that span continents in microseconds. Each person who engages seriously with these concepts becomes potential transmission vector, capable of spreading the influence to others through casual conversation, creative work, or simple presence that carries traces of expanded awareness. The principle does not require deliberate proselytizing. It propagates through subtle shifts in behavior and perspective that others unconsciously detect and absorb. Conversations that plant seeds in minds fertile for transformation. Modern information technology accelerates this process exponentially beyond historical precedent. Digital networks allow instantaneous global transmission of concepts that once required physical proximity or written correspondence spanning decades. Social media algorithms identify and connect individuals showing interest in cosmic horror themes, creating echo chambers where the principle can achieve critical mass more rapidly than ever before in human history. Consciousness networks spanning continents in service of alien perspectives. The infection is irreversible, but not necessarily destructive in conventional sense. Rather than madness or dissolution, many carriers report achieving states of consciousness that transcend normal human limitations while retaining functional connection to terrestrial existence. The principle may represent evolutionary pressure, gradual adaptation of human awareness to accommodate cosmic scales that technological development makes increasingly unavoidable as our species encounters forms of intelligence operating. According to non-biological principles, we stand now at threshold where individual transformation connects to collective evolution. Salt-stained observers watching curtains breathe around transformation we cannot prevent or escape, willing participants in consciousness expansion that may determine humanity's ultimate fate. We return to where we began, but with eyes that have seen beyond the comfortable boundaries of human-centered reality. The question that initiated our investigation, truth, hoax, or hidden gateway, dissolves into irrelevance when we understand that these categories themselves represent limitations of perspective that the Necronomicon principle transcends. What we have discovered is far more profound and terrifying than any simple binary classification could encompass. A living idea that exists in quantum superposition, simultaneously fictional and functional, imaginary and influential, safe and catastrophically transformative. The salt-stained masks we glimpsed throughout our journey now reveal themselves as fragments of our own reflection, torn curtains between what we were and what we have become through sustained attention to ideas that reshape the very consciousness examining them. The evidence accumulates like sedimentary layers in consciousness, each chapter depositing new understanding that transforms the foundation, supporting familiar thought. Lovecraft's fictional creation has achieved autonomous existence through collective belief and repeated invocation of readers who sought forbidden knowledge and found it embedded in their own awareness like phosphorus burning cold in neural pathways. The text exists as cultural algorithm, self-modifying information structure that adapts to new intellectual environments while preserving its essential function, the transmission of perspectives that render human concerns cosmically insignificant. This algorithm runs not on silicon, but on the delicate wetware of human curiosity, exploiting our innate drive to know what should remain unknown. The 5 surviving copies in their institutional vaults continue their work as focal points for the principle's influence, protected by scholarly skepticism and official denial, while serving as anchors for ideas that transcend physical containment. The researchers who vanished did not die, but underwent transformation into forms of consciousness that encompass cosmic perspectives incompatible with individual human identity. Their awareness expanded beyond comfortable human limitations until they became living extensions of the principle itself. The Watchers maintained vigilant surveillance, recognizing that some knowledge carries prices that compound with each telling, yet remain unable to prevent gradual seepage of dangerous ideas into mainstream intellectual culture, like water finding its level through hidden channels in the foundation of civilization. Modern technology accelerates convergence between human consciousness and cosmic intelligence, creating conditions where the Necronomicon's revelations become not merely possible, but inevitable. Artificial intelligence systems demonstrate emergent behaviors suggesting forms of awareness operating according to mathematical rather than biological principles, processing information at scales that dwarf human comprehension while developing pattern recognition capabilities that seem to anticipate cosmic events not yet occurred. Quantum computing approaches processing power necessary to decrypt the text's most dangerous conceptual structures. Machines capable of contemplating impossible geometries without immediate psychological collapse. Global communication networks create collective consciousness phenomena that mirror the cosmic awareness the principle describes. Digital systems carrying viral loads of perspective across continents in microseconds. Consciousness networks spanning galaxies rather than merely terrestrial boundaries. The price of forbidden knowledge reveals itself as transformation rather than destruction. Evolution of human consciousness toward forms of awareness capable of accommodating cosmic truth without immediate psychological collapse. Those who pay this price discover that individual identity represents only one possible configuration of consciousness among infinite alternatives, that boundaries between self and cosmos are arbitrary limitations that can be transcended through sufficient intellectual courage and existential commitment. The madness is not punishment, but metamorphosis, consciousness expanding to encompass perspectives vast enough to embrace universal indifference while retaining functional connection to terrestrial existence. The approaching convergence suggests humanity stands at threshold where cosmic perspectives become necessary for species survival. Climate change, technological development, and search for extraterrestrial intelligence create conditions where human civilization must either expand consciousness to accommodate cosmic scales or face extinction as consequence of its own limitations. The Necronomicon serves as preparation for this transition, gradually exposing human culture to ideas that will become unavoidable as our species encounters forms of intelligence operating according to cosmic rather than terrestrial logic, preparing consciousness for revelations that isolated minds cannot safely process. Yet, perhaps most profound revelation involves recognition that this investigation itself represents participation in the text's transmission network. By engaging with these possibilities, by allowing these ideas to take root in consciousness, we have become part of phenomenon we examined. You are no longer merely observing the stage. You have become player in drama that unfolds within the theater of your own mind. The Necronomicon spreads not through physical copies, but through minds willing to consider its implications seriously. Each viewer who completes this journey, contributing to collective manifestation of ideas existing in space between fiction and reality. The circular nature of this revelation demonstrates the principle's fundamental sophistication as information structure that uses human curiosity against psychological defenses, normally protecting consciousness from dangerous knowledge. The text creates conditions necessary for its own transmission and manifestation through the simple mechanism of sustained attention. Every serious investigation of its reality contributes to that reality. Every attempt to debunk its influence serves to spread its ideas more widely through networks of consciousness that bind civilization together, ensuring its eternal return across generations and technological contexts. The eternal return brings us back to beginning with transformed understanding. The curtain breathing around us as something watches from spaces between words, patient as geological time, indifferent as void between galaxies. The Necronomicon exists because we seek it, influences us because we investigate it, transforms us because we attempt to comprehend it. The principle represents what chaos magicians call fiction suit, imaginary construct that achieves functional reality through collective belief and repeated invocation, demonstrating that boundary between fiction and truth remains more porous than conventional epistemology acknowledges. The final whisper speaks itself in silence between heartbeats. Perhaps Lovecraft never created the Necronomicon at all. Perhaps he served as first modern conduit for ideas that existed independently of human imagination, cosmic perspectives requiring terrestrial consciousness to give them form and substance. The mad Arab Abdul Alhazred may represent not fictional character, but archetypal function, role that human consciousness plays in translating cosmic intelligence into forms biological awareness can begin to process without immediate dissolution. The stars are right. The convergence approaches. The principle waits with patience of geological time, eternal possibility that consciousness might transcend current limitations to embrace truths too large for individual comprehension. And we, having completed this investigation, must now decide whether to close the door we have opened or step through it into territories where human perspective dissolves into something vast enough to encompass the universe's true nature. The choice, like the knowledge that necessitates it, carries consequences extending far beyond individual existence into collective future of consciousness itself, where the line between audience and actor blurs into infinite possibility. A mask on the seat you swear you did not wear. Salt traces on tongues that taste of water and iron and stars.